welcome to the Bad Vibes Club. Thanks so much for joining us. This time we have Sophie Lewis. Sophie is a translator. She lives in London. She translates French and Portuguese to English. She used to be an editor as well. She talks a little bit about that. And she writes as well. She writes articles and essays on translation. We spoke quite particularly about two books she has translated by Noémi Lefebvre, Blue Self-Portrait and Poetics of Work, both published by Les Fugitives in the UK and Transit Books in the US. The idea was to kind of drill down into the translation of these books and their very different styles and tones. Later on we talk about literary tone, as you'll hear, and their use of, well, kind of Noémi's use of motifs and turns of phrase and certain kind of idiomatic language that can be difficult or very interesting challenges for a translator. You'll hear later us talking about the phrase fucking farce, which comes up quite a lot in Poetics of Work, and an English colloquialism that Sophie wanted to use for another one of Noémi's motifs that got nixed by the American publisher. We also talk about Sophie having to translate technical information about Sig Sauer guns, and we hear some really interesting stuff. This is, as I say later, this is the stuff that I'm really fascinated by now, is these very, very practical parts of what translating is. How Sophie reads text, how she does that first draft of a translation, how she finds out whether her translations hit the mark or not, and things like publishers' reports, all that good stuff. But we'd both recently been to see Matthew Barney's new show at the Hayward, so we've started off talking about that. Did you watch the whole thing?
No. I came in the middle of the film somewhere,
yes,
or a third in, and then watched a third or something and went and looked at more trees. And I'm going to watch properly the whole thing maybe a couple of times.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because you get sent a link with the ticket.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could watch the whole Matthew Barney film online. I just don't know if I could do it. Like physically, I think I would just start getting twitchy. There's something about a gallery where maybe it's just authority or the big screen or the sound or something where I just sat there and really enjoyed that feeling of not being able to do anything else. But you have the patience
totally
for
right. You're right. I think the best place would have been to watch it there, but I was with a pregnant friend and she had sort of limited patience.
Yeah, totally. I was just on my own to watch it, and it was probably the first time I've been in a gallery in about 6 months, and it was like luxurious to just sit there and spend the whole afternoon there. But I find it so hard to watch art films with other people because there's always this pressure of like, oh, do they want to go in a minute? Like, should we kind of finish up? And there's no, especially in those films, like there's nothing to grip onto to be like, okay, we've seen enough now. There's no no story to hang on to, is there? Well, I guess there is.
There's more story in that than in some art films I've tried to watch with other people. Knowing Diana Actaeon a little bit, or sort of in outline, and then enjoying the snow was pretty good.
Yeah. Apparently it's caused lots of controversy because the lead, I guess she's an actress in this case, the lead performer, is a marksman who's I don't know if she's actually involved in the NRA, but the NRA love her because she's a woman who loves to shoot guns, so she's a good kind of spokesperson. So in America the film's generated a bit of controversy, and the title readout is this idea of a kind of, what's the word, a base that you would go to when you're fighting the American government or whatever. It's all these kind of prepper anti-government kind of imagery and stuff.
What I wanted to know, which I'll have to sort of investigate a bit, was whether wolves did get reintroduced in Idaho, or whether that was just a project that they saw off.
No, they did. They did get reintroduced, and it's really, really controversial.
Yeah.
And the kind of, I suppose, to put it in really basic, reductive terms, the right-wing gun-toting people who live there don't like it, and they over the years changed the laws so they are allowed to shoot more and more of the wolves. So they kind of cull them, but to the point now where they're basically trying to hunt them into extinction again. Not extinction, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was thinking we could talk about, obviously you talk about your work generally as a translator, but we could focus on I need to say her name. Is it Noémi?
Yeah, Noémi. It's kind of got almost two stresses.
Noémi Lefebvre.
Yeah.
And the two books that you translated of hers, Blue Self-Portrait and the Poetics of Work, isn't it? It hasn't got a the. And I read Poetics of Work first, and then did you lend me? So is this your copy?
No, I think it's yours now. I think I gave it to you.
I know, but I mean, this? So this has got your. I'm just going to start with this because I thought this was really interesting. This has got your notes in.
Oh, sorry.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, probably. I don't know any. There's no one else's notes in there.
But I couldn't work out why you would be making notes in a book that's published that you've translated.
I think I was teaching it at Lancaster University in a kind of mini master's course, something like that.
Yeah.
To do with music.
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah, actually, a lot of it's to do with Schoenberg. I don't know. There's things like places. So to give the listeners some context, the book Blue Self-Portrait is written as a single paragraph. That's right, isn't it? There are no paragraph breaks at all.
That's right.
And I would say it's almost like, in my head, it's almost like Thomas Bernhardian in its relentlessness. Very much so.
Bernhard is one of her top faves and very much so.
But quite a lot of the things that you've put in are places where you think there could be a paragraph break for some reason.
I need to review these notes.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Past me.
Because I was thinking, I mean, now it makes more sense if you were teaching with it. But I was so intrigued at the idea that you presumably, and maybe you could talk about this, to translate a book, you have to read it multiple times in the original. And then I suppose that in some ways you're checking it back and forth. So you're reading your own text in a way that you might not even read it if you were just writing something. So it just struck me as really funny that you'd then gone back through the published edition of making notes. But maybe you could talk a bit about that process, because that's obviously kind of fundamental, isn't it?
Yeah. To sort of start from the back end of it, one of the things that's great is that things do get published, and generally you're not allowed to touch them again, because otherwise you just having been freed from the constraints of finishing, you might never end it, and it would be disastrous. The process of translating, you just have to start. I mean, that sounds silly, but obvious as well. You just have to get going and dive in. And although I had read it before I began translating, I think the key is for the translator to remember that they can't possibly have taken everything in on that first reading. And so ideas about structure and motifs that matter, and even particular meanings of what happened, are probably some things are going to be wrong. And so translate it all the way through. It won't be great translation. It won't be great prose. B, I always leave in loads of options. I leave lots of different ideas in my translation. So it's at 3 or 4 times as long, and it's just full of, it's not complete. It's not continuous prose. And C, I won't have worked things out. I won't have discovered what the actual meaning of stuff is. I'll have gone quickly and kind of skated over bits. And for me, that's fine. I expect that. And then I go back to the beginning and start again and go in a more meticulous way, which I find easier because I've got stuff to work with. When there's English to work on rather than another language somewhere, a complete text that's perfect and a blank page, I find it much easier to work on the sort of higgledy-piggledy prose that I've started to create.
So you already read the book, and I guess we could talk about your relationship with the author in a bit, but when you know you're going to translate it, you come back to the book, and do you read it all the way through again before you even start translating, or do you just start going? Just start,
because it's not going to be, nothing will be perfect anyway, understanding or plan-wise. So getting going is the best way to engage.
Yeah.
Deep end-wise.
That's so interesting. So you're doing the read, because in my head I was thinking it was interesting that it's a process of being a reader and then turning that into some kind of production or creative work, but you're saying that actually those things happen at the same time straight away, and then they happen again and again. And I suppose,
that's
at what point are you not looking at the original text anymore?
The last read or two. The very last read, I try really hard to not look, because the idea is that if something trips me up, then the reason is that I haven't written it very well. And if I can't rewrite it in such a way that it's good, then I go back to the original and see what it was I didn't get or what's difficult about it. But mostly it's just about my composition, my writing by that point.
So is that the moment when it becomes like an object of its own rather than an object that's in relation to someone else's kind of thing?
If a point needs to be chosen when that happens, I think that it's a dodgy is a poor word. It's not necessarily a helpful exercise to try and work out or to set a line when that happens.
Yeah.
Because it will always be in relation to the previous text. It's just that it still has to be taken as a work by itself at the same time. It's a kind of double existence. I think that's how I see it. Otherwise, yes, you become engaged in other games around the side of it. Like if you change the title to the extent that it's not obviously a translation of the first title, have you separated it further and made it yours more, or things like that?
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Maybe we said this before when we spoke, but Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. I've heard that a much closer translation would be something like Notes from Under the Floorboards.
I don't know that. It's nice.
I always thought it was like a tale of like Russian nihilists or something, because Notes from Underground sounds like, well, yeah, like terrorism or spies or something. But actually it's this kind of story of this very resentful person spitefully complaining, and Notes from Under the Floorboards is like, makes a lot more sense.
No one's published that translation?
No, I don't know. That's what made me want to read it, because I'd never really read much Dostoevsky. And then I read this thing about it being more about resentment, and I thought, that's quite interesting. So I read it.
Titles are annoyingly huge.
Yeah.
I mean, Proust and all of that. And I fussed over the article for Poetics or the Poetics and a Poetics for a stupid, length of time. And
so Blue Self-Portrait is auto-portrait bleu, isn't it, in French?
En bleu, yes, it is.
En bleu.
It's also it's a prior title because it's the title of the painting by Schoenberg.
Yeah, okay, so that already has a translated version that you can just say, okay, that's obviously what we're going to call it.
It had to be
Poetics of Work, what was that in the original French?
Poétique de l'emploi.
And does that not require an article in French?
It could have had one. To not have one in French is a bigger decision than to not have one in English. Yeah, you'd be more likely to call it Une Poétique de l'emploi or something like that. Yeah, I mean, they're much more into the articles in general, like La France, we just say England.
Oh yeah, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like that idea that they're just much more into articles.
There's probably a grammatical way to describe this language.
I prefer that. Because I think that's what's so intriguing to people like me who have no second language skills. I haven't translated something since I did Latin in year 7 at school, and we had to translate things. That was the last time I really did translation. Puella sub arborum.
That was good.
Yeah. Actually, I think I was wrong.
I did a bit of the same course, possibly.
Yeah, it's the book, I think, that anyone who's doing Latin gets. It's about girls being under trees, people being in atriums a lot.
Nutella.
That kind of thing.
Was largely there.
She's always in an atrium. What's so fascinating is the idea that what surrounds or what a language is when it's not a dead language like Latin, it has all this context in this culture that makes it what it is. And there's so many moments when, now that I'm explicitly reading a book that I know has been translated, I know who's translated, I know you've had to make these decisions. I can't remember which one it is, if it's Blue Self-Portrait or Poetics of Work, but there are some almost like anachronistic English words in there. And I wondered, I haven't actually made any notes of what they are, but I wondered, because they can't be literal translations from French words. Like, how do you make those decisions where things, especially with Noémi Lefebvre, is that she's so idiosyncratic, like the way she writes, changes between the books, and also she's got a kind of, she likes turns of phrases, she'll repeat turns of phrases over and over again. Like, you as you were saying last time we met, you're not French, and it's not like you spend lots of time in France. So do you have to kind of keep up with the culture of France or literary culture in French, or how do you know when to take these kind of decisions?
I ought to be keeping up with the literary culture in France, but that's a crazy thing to attempt to do.
Yeah.
While still being what I should do, as well as the literary culture in Brazil.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you do.
The other one that I should be keeping up with, but then there's England as well. So that's crazy. So I have shortcuts, which is basically friends. Literary friends, reading friends. I also personally think it's more important to read more of an author's own works and also what they've been reading and also what they like. So you create a world where you understand the idiom and a lot of where their influences come from. And I would never understand the majority of where her idiosyncratic uses come from. But I can always ask her. And I have some key people who I go to who are linguistically aware and a bit multilingual and based in the places I ought to be. And I think it's got to be that way. You can't master languages to the extent that you also master their cultures.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, especially if you're doing multiple languages. But then more and more on this podcast, like what I'm always fascinated by is these kind of obvious practical solutions to these problems of accessing or like creating an aesthetic. Yeah, of course. You just like phone someone up who you know that's in France and be like, would it be totally insane to translate this as this? Or like, do you know what she's talking about when she says this?
That's exactly what happens. And then they lead me to a new dictionary that I hadn't discovered. And quite often I'm researching stuff in our sort of realm of English language resources. But museums are really helpful, and institutions of all kinds have archives where I can sort of compare costumes or I can compare historical documents and just stuff that they've got. What was I thinking of? I had to do some work on Sig Sauers for Poetics of Work, the gun that the police are holding when they're sort of attacking the poor guy they're after in that part. There's a sort of description. It's basically, I think, an excerpt from a gun manual all about the Sig Sauer. And this is like a publicity sort of thing, all about how amazing it is and how well it's been made. And I had, this is not my realm here. So I put a call out. There's some really helpful translators forums. And one guy turned out to have done all kinds of work on weaponry. And he advised me about grips and holstering and stuff that I couldn't have known about in English, never mind in French. And so it was, you just need networks really more than anything.
And with that situation, do you ever go down crazy rabbit holes? Are you tempted to try and find the same bit of documentation that the company put out for the English market?
If that exists, I want to find it. But quite often I don't rate the translations used for that kind of commercial stuff.
Yeah.
It's too different. And also practically, even if it's a decent translation, but it's too different from what was in my text, then I think I have to probably retranslate because otherwise I'm going to be talking about other things.
So maybe we could talk about your relationship with the author then. So with Noémi, did you know her already in a personal capacity before you read her work?
I hadn't met her. I didn't know her work. I entirely owe my translating relationship with her to the first publisher, the publisher of Blue Self-Portrait. Cécile Lee runs Les Fugitives, and she said to me, I should read this book and I should translate it. She thought it was one for me. And I read it and agreed, really, really loved it, fell for it completely, and was really too in awe of Noémi for a while to even write to her, and then introduced myself and sent her my usual sort of starter batch of questions, which is, I always hope it's the longest one because I can imagine that authors are just groaning when they receive these things. But she was quite game in response. She gave me a bit of detail here and there. And I set up the launch for that book in my local bookshop, The Review in Peckham. And so she came over, which was just amazing. And we got to hang out in the pub. And I mean, it was like a French alien on English territory somehow. She was like a little plot of Frenchness that just landed but didn't modify at all.
Yeah, good.
She's absolutely, she's so much her own person, and it was brilliant to have her. So we sort of began a proper friendship from there, I think.
Okay, that's interesting. So in those starter questions, are there things that you always ask authors? Are there things that you find yourself always having to ask, or is it always different for every book?
The questions about particular words are always different, and like, what is this? Can you send me a picture? That comes back, but it's about different things. But the thing that I'm now asking every time is, what should I be reading? What have you been reading, and what should I be reading? I need a reading list now. I've become professional enough to ask for it in advance.
Yeah, because I suppose you could just start work and then get halfway through the book and be like, oh, I've never read that book, or I've never seen that picture, or whatever. Well,
not seeing the picture, that's okay, because if you've got time, that's all right. But getting deep into Victor Klemperer in good time to kind of get the point as well as find the quotes is better done in advance.
And how does that relationship change over the course of the novel? So you do it over email? Are you ever chatting on the phone? Are you obviously not meeting up in person necessarily? But
one of my more recent translations was done for a book by an anthropologist, and she was quite often not anywhere to be found at all. But occasionally she'd pop up and she'd say, "Let's speak," and we would talk, and it would be funny time zones, and we would just sort of hash everything out speaking, which for her was just the way to do it. I really don't mind. I don't mind as long as we are understanding each other. There is a unique problem. I think it's a unique problem for people translating into English, which is that a huge number of authors not just think they have good English, but have got really quite good English, sometimes extremely good. And that means that they have a grasp on what I'm creating as a translator that is excellent, but not quite good enough to understand all the things that I've chosen to do. So it's risky. There needs to be a lot of trust. And trying to establish the trust and maintain it is really crucial, while still giving them the access that they want and, genuinely consulting.
Yeah, because I suppose if they couldn't read English at all, then they would have no interest in seeing what you've done. But with English translations, do authors tend to want to see them as they're progressing?
Some do. I really try and put them off. Yeah. Because it's messy, like I said.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
No, mostly not, but they do sometimes want to see it when I hand it to the publisher, or before I do that. And even then, it's not been edited. So there's a whole, there's a kind of layer of work that's not been applied to it. So I sort of try and do lots of caveats and say, of course, but, just hold on. Send comments, but it's not, it's not finished. Don't panic. Don't worry. But it's also when as an editor, I had a bad experience with an author who learned of a decision made by her translators who were commissioned by me. So there's a whole other working scenario.
Yeah.
These translators had made a reasonable decision about changing the dominant tense from present to a sort of average storytelling past, and she was very forceful and adamant that it should be in the present. And due to contractual obligations, she had a kind of final say, and the translators had to go through the whole very long book and change it all, which is not a simple thing to do. It was mind blowing. So I never want to be in the position of those poor translators.
Yeah.
So I do my best to avoid that.
But that does seem like quite a big decision. You wrote about this I can't remember if it's the afterword of Poetics of Work or just a piece that you wrote somewhere about you translated the whole of Poetics of Work, and then I can't remember. You'll have to tell me the story, but basically about there being no gendered pronouns used in the book. Sorry, no personal gendered pronouns for the protagonist or the narrator. Is that right?
No gender markers. That's right.
That's
I wouldn't say pronouns because it's not all about the person, but about objects. But yes, I wrote for Pen Transmissions. It was just an article. It was kind of conceived as a translator's note, but I wrote it too late to go in the book. And it was something that I wanted to get off my chest, but I was very nervous about it, as you can imagine.
Because did it feel like a crazy slip up? I mean, you said you went back through the book and realised that you'd managed to translate it in the way that she'd written it without actually realising that it had been a kind of conscious decision on her part.
Yeah, I was both lucky and competent, but on the big scale, massively incompetent for not having noticed this huge feature of the text. And it was pointed out to me months after I'd handed it in. Someone commented on how excited they were, to see what I'd done, particularly given this amazing feature of the text. And I sort of did a secret double take, and it was just awful. It was totally awful. So I wrote to both publishers and I said, look, to my great embarrassment, I realized that Noémi's done this amazing thing and it's an incredible feat of work and she's proud of it. And I'm just very concerned that we need to review the text. And then I read the whole thing through as carefully as I could. And it seemed bizarrely fine. It was fine. I didn't change anything in the light of that reading. And then I spoke to Noémi because I'd been so embarrassed about the whole thing that I couldn't tell her until I'd established that it was okay. And then the book was kind of being sent to press, and Cecile said, do you want to write a translator's note? And I sort of sat on it for a while. And then, the only thing to write was about this. There were some small niggles there were many other things I could have written, but that was the thing that needed saying, because it's such a dirty secret really for a translator to hold on to. And so And so I did, and I've received really nice feedback. I think it's the kind of slip that people are very afraid of making. But it's a practical thing. And two translators wrote to me and said they'd done something similar. But I think I was also lucky because the book was so well constructed.
Interesting. Okay, so I mean, obviously it's your own competence as well, but what you're saying, there is part of it is that the book was so well constructed and so the intention was carried through so well that there wasn't another way of translating it that would have like embellished your...
That's right. It wasn't that. That's right. And there's also, I suppose, an element of the features, the ways the two languages work, that mean having done the work she did in the French, I'd have had to distort the book to add things back in.
Okay. So wait a minute. I'm just thinking about French. Does she not? What
she doesn't do is have anyone talk about the narrator. There's no third person discussion of the narrator. The dialogue is all dialogue between narrator and father. So it's all just you. And other than that, we're in the narrator's head, what this I does walking around.
They're really amazing books. Poetics of Work is so strange and such a kind of refreshing antidote to lots of... Because I would still say there's some kind of auto-fictional elements in the style or something, but it's so much more fragmented and kind of, I don't know what the phrase is, like dreamlike. And then I read Blue Self-Portrait and I was struck by how completely different the book is. Like the structure, like I said, is like this kind of long, unbroken stream of thought, whereas Poetics of Work is fragmented kind of in multiple ways. Like all the paragraphs are split up with kind of spacing, and then there's chapters, and then there's also there's a few things that are like lesson 1, lesson 2 about poetry or about work. I can't quite remember the details of them.
Yeah, that's a series of 10 lessons in the sense of maxims, I suppose, ostensibly addressed to young poets, which could make up a treatise like The Poetics of Work or something like that. But it's they are a little bit silly, some of them, or imply a bit too much, but it's not about poetry, or they are odd.
They're there's magical elements to them. That's the way I was thinking about it. But they're such different works, and I felt almost stupid for having thought about the Poetics of Work in terms of autofiction, because the characters that the narrator's characters are so they're not so different, but they're very obviously different characters. And it struck me that she's just good at creating a character. She's not like drawing necessarily on her own life, because in the Poetics of the Work, the character's almost like a stoner living off the royalties of some kind of shitty supermarket. I can't remember what her phrase is. It's a nice phrase. It's like a supermarket novel or something.
It is a supermarket novel. That's the only place it sells, but it sells a lot. What does she call it? It took me a while to work this out.
A thick wit novel.
Oh, that's it. I've got it too.
A thick wit novel. So do you remember what that was in the original French?
Yes, it's a roman débile. It's stupid novel. It's like stupid, like STOO, that kind.
Okay, yeah. And so how many books has she done? She did Blue Self-Portrait and Poetics of Work, but has she done more in French?
Yes, she's done, I think, 6 or 7, including a couple with little presses. And there were 2 that I've reported on for the publishers, Poétique de l'Enfance, Politics of... hang on, I'm going to find them and say the titles correctly.
Yeah.
L'état des sentiments à l'âge adulte, which means, badly translated, the state of feeling in the adult age, or as an adult, that's better. And l'enfance politique, which means a political childhood. And then most recently, a double-sided book. It's parle, which on one side, the first one, and that means speak, and the other side is tais-toi, which means shut up. That's quite fun.
So you can read the novel both ways, or there are 2 stories that you can read?
There's 2 books in it. There's 2 books, and she's pitched it, described it as the book and the commentary on the book. And for her, this is because she's not a literature professor, so she's not a kind of academic who does commentary. So she's had a go at that as an outsider. Parle is very much kind of talking heads type. It's a sort of ongoing, never-ending riff on idées reçues, kind of things we understand, sayings that we say about modern life, and the implications of them, and then woven further into sayings that we say. And it's a sort of, it's quite Beckettian. I think it goes on, it doesn't stop. We don't know who's speaking. And then tais-toi is a sort of analysis, a deconstruction of what goes on, not just in parle, but also when we create a commentary. I think she's done really, really well for someone who claims not to know what they're doing.
So are you going to translate another one of her books?
Well, there was a choice made in order to choose Poetics of Work. That was chosen of the three. That seemed like the best one that would speak well to people not in France. And so I would like to work on the other two because I think they're both brilliant, in particular one of them. But this latest one, Parle and Tais-toi, is like, it's got the glitz of the new, and it's being talked about. I've got some really nice reviews. And it's also been sent to me by her publisher. And she said, you're going to have a nightmare with this one, with a smile on her face. That's kind of a red rag. I don't like to say no to the really difficult ones. I would like to try it.
Yeah.
So I need to kind of have a think about whether I can do it and then tell everybody who might publish it that I want to do it.
But wait, you said something that I didn't know what it was. You said something like you've done a report for the publisher or a publisher's report or something.
Oh, yeah. the grimy backside of publishing. Publishers who publish books in translation either often can't read the languages in which the books are written, or they don't have time. And so they call on people who have some sense of that author's work or that literary scene to, maybe translators, not always, quite often translators, to read the books, write a report, sometimes submit a sample so they can have a sense of what it's like when it hits English, and send that to them. It's slave labor. It pays extremely badly, but there's quite often, there's the possibility of a translation at the end of it.
Yeah.
And it's good to be talking to publishers about what they're interested in. So it's kind of why one would do it. But
what is the report? Is it just about what the book's about, or is it about its impact in France in this case, or is it purely about the book, or is it about kind of market stuff as well?
No, it's definitely about market stuff too. It's definitely about the book. It's about the reception in France, but it's very much about how that would translate into an English market, and whether it would translate and who would read it, and whether it would be something the particular publisher would publish really well, would look good next to your other books, would make sense given your taste, that kind of stuff.
So you didn't do one of those for Blue Self-Portrait? Because
I didn't. that was wanted already. And also Cécile is French, so she's the reader.
Okay. So she'd found it anyway.
But she's very rare in the scene as someone who is that good at reading the language.
I imagine sometimes when you work with the same writer, they write books in the same way each time, and you come to know them better over time, and you kind of know their style or their tone, or how, kind of however you want to phrase that. But these two books are a good example of where that just isn't the case. So was it like when you started sitting down to translate Poetics of Work after having translated Blue Self-Portrait, are you immediately aware that it's a completely different tone, or does it kind of build up and you start to realise that it's a different tone? Or were you already aware of that because you'd read them in the French anyway?
I had some awareness of that from my first readings, but I try not to think too hard about that in advance, partly because, as you say, it's quite a big concern and one of detail at the same time. It matters a lot, therefore if I get hung up on it, that will be difficult. So I try not to think about it and to let it build. And what I found in Poetics of Work was a series of collages with material taken in a kind of serial form from some of the same sources over again. So if you take the collage idea, we've got like this book and that book, or this magazine and that scene, and she's taken pieces of them and laid them over and created a whole with loads and loads of them. So there were several tones, I think, that I needed to get right in there. One of them, occasionally, quite rarely, was not very far from Blue Self-Portrait, but more often the sort of stoner flaneur person who runs around with demonstrations but isn't really political and isn't demonstrating, in fact, isn't taking part, and the one who holds parties with people they don't know as well. This person was the dominant one. But then there was all the Klemperer, the Krauss, the Kafka, the deliberate allowing in of Ginsberg in that stoner's life. Ginsberg and Whitman were quite important, more like Wayne markers. They weren't really sort of tone collage stuff, but they did infect some parts of the text. I realized at times that I was reading Ginsberg translated into French by Noémi, in like where it's set out in poetry. I found things like dans le dos du réel, which means literally in the back of the real. And I was trying to translate this and I couldn't work out what it meant. And then I was like, aha, this is in back of the real. So that kind of stuff happened.
So to be clear, that's a direct translation of Ginsberg. Is that what you're saying?
That's the title of one of the poems that she quotes. But she doesn't give the title of the poem when she quotes it.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit distant. And so finding it was like a little archaeological dig.
Yeah.
Stuff comes and it's okay to piece it together bit by bit, I think, with tone.
This is just a more general question, but how would you describe the idea of tone?
It's a really difficult one. I think tone is very close to style, but style stands out more. Style is a little bit more ostentatious and therefore it's deliberate. You could probably name most styles or describe most styles more easily than you can describe a tone.
Yeah.
I think tone is specifically not very noticeable except when you train your eye on that aspect of things. And it's made up of the same kinds of choices that would create a style, but possibly they're also more micro level too. So how you construct sentences, what the lengths of those clauses are, how you connect them, habits of writing, how you structure the paragraphs, perspectives, it's everything. It really is, it's the complete everything and what that adds up to. And that means at its crudest, is this ironic, or is this like a play, or is this like a Woolfian monologue, or what all of these things, you can pull them apart, you can dissect them like a close criticism and discover what makes up the tone, then put it all back in and you've realized that you've understood what the tone is made of, but you still can't give it a name.
Yeah, that's the difference, right, between style and tone, is that style, to a certain extent, I'm sure some people would argue otherwise, you could kind of describe it and describe the techniques that have created it, or the decisions that have created it. You were talking about intention before.
Yeah, I would like to hear how you are thinking about it.
Well, I think the reason I'm drawn to it is because it seems to be one of those things where the best description I've seen of it is Sean Nagai, who's a kind of a literary theorist but philosopher, and she trained under Stanley Cavell, who I think we spoke about before, and him being kind of culture studies, one of the kind of originators of that way of working. And I think she takes it from him. It's this idea of, and this is what I like about it, is that this is also quite a tricksy definition. So a semblance of feeling that is identified with a series of techniques, but not reducible to any of them, or even reducible to them as a group. So even in that definition, you have like something that's like something else. So like tone is like feeling, it kind of resembles feeling, or is a resembling object of feeling or something. And then you have this thing where you can explain it in terms of technique, but that isn't the explanation for it. And I love the fact that like at both levels, you're not getting the thing, you haven't got something that is like equivalent to something else. And I think that is what draws me to it, because I guess that's the kind of remainder or something. And that's why I think I wanted to ask you about it, because I suppose with translation, there's this probably a very obviously false idea of the two texts having some like one-to-one equivalence. And I suppose it never has that, and at the same time it does have that, and it aspires to that, but it always fails to do that. And if it did do that, then it wouldn't be a very good translation. Like all of these things like are never resolved or something. And I just think it's really fascinating that even in the two books that that I've read because you translated them, they're such different objects, and me trying to talk to you about them is such a weird conversation, because I'm obviously talking to you about like a very specific thing that's in a way very obvious what a translator does. But once you get into it, it becomes, this kind of Mobius strip of describing the relationship between me, this work, you, the French book, and the author.
I think the closer you get, it sort of atomizes. And I think you're just left with the work of how you decided on each word, and that definitely doesn't add up to the translation unless you kind of step back and just let it all happen again. It's very it doesn't stay still.
Have you ever had to make any big decisions in a translation? You were talking earlier about kind of unfortunate situation in which the translators had made a decision about changing the tense. Have you ever had to do something like that just to make a book work?
I've not had anything as thoroughly needing changing as that. I did discover the perfect translation for something that recurs in Poetics of Work, and it was perfect, but not allowable in the US. It just, I mean, basically, it's an English turn of phrase. It's to take the piss, right? It was perfect. It remains perfect. But the primary publisher of that book was the US publisher. And I sort of wrote to him saying, I think you're going to say no, but can I say take the piss here, and here? And he said, no. So I needed to find something else that was inevitably going to be not as good, but try and make the reader not realize that they're missing out on this incredibly perfect, spot-on British phrase.
So let's just to be clear that it's not admissible in the US because it just isn't a turn of phrase over there, not because it has the word.
They just don't use it, and getting pissed is getting angry, and it's confusing. And
yes, of course, yeah. And what was the original French phrase?
Il faut tout de même pas chier. Il faut pas chier. It's impossible to translate in any literal way. It means you mustn't take a shit or something like that, or you really mustn't take a shit literally, but that's not what it means. What it means is don't be annoying. Don't mess around.
So don't take the piss, as in don't push it, don't overstep the mark. Yeah.
That's exactly it. You've got it. So I wrote to him, can I write, you shouldn't go taking the piss? And I gave him a couple of alternatives, which I really didn't rate. And he wrote back saying, taking the piss is one of my favorite British expressions, but maybe also because it is so British and I would cringe if an American said it. You can't have it.
Oh. So what did you use in the end? I think this might be one of the things that I was thinking of when I was thinking about quite specific, almost anachronistic phrases. I can't remember what it is. Do you know?
Right. I'm going to find...
Because she says it a lot. It's a recurring thing, isn't it?
Oh, mustn't give people too much shit.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, that's such a different way of describing that idea, isn't it?
I don't want to undo my great work, but it's not as good.
No, but that's so interesting because I was talking to, I don't know, in the last podcast, for whatever reason, we were talking about the fact that there are different editions of Harry Potter. I've never read the Harry Potter books, but this person was surprised that there would be different English and American editions of Harry Potter. But that makes sense in a book like that, right? Where it's got like, it's selling millions in each market. But I suppose for these kind of books, like, you're only going to get one English translation unless it starts selling well, I suppose.
The two publishers made small changes.
Oh, they did?
They did, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you remember any of the changes they made in the between the American and English one?
Yeah, this is all in our correspondence. I don't think I do right now.
No, that's fine.
I mean, to an extent, I need to let it go,
Yeah, because that's the thing as well, right? Like if I was a writer, if I was having something published, there would be a point at which I would be like, I do not care. Like, do what you like. I mean, obviously, like, you get your edits done and stuff. But if they were like, oh, we just need to change this word, I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'm not even going to look at that. Just do it. And I suppose you have that same feeling as a translator, right? There's a point at which you're like, this is, to me, it's finished. And any changes anyone makes are kind of, well, I suppose you do care what they are, but
no, I care. I want to know, but absolutely, there's a point like that. There's a point where you've not only done the job, you've also done the advocacy. You fought for your corner, and it's either been accepted or not, or modified in some way, and that's the best. That's the most you want to do, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Not healthy otherwise.
Yeah, fucking fast was really a standout kind of repetition in poetics of work because it's used in lots of different ways, like over and over again. And I suppose that's one of those things, right, where it's a motif that's recurring, but it's kind of being changed in the way it's used or something. So it's like at some point you just have to, even as a translator, I suppose you just have to accept that it's going to come up over and over again and not worry too much about the context or exactly what information is being passed over by that. In
Noémi's work, I tend to see it as musical. It's like hitting the same chord sequence again after a little while. Yeah, it's properly a motif. It's genuinely a motif in the sense of 20th and 21st century music where you hit a note no, it's more like a cadence. It's more like a sequence. So it comes back in that way.
Yeah, like a refrain, something to enjoy on its own terms or something.
Mm-hmm.
This would have required one of us to do some prep, but we were talking about famous mistranslation. You were talking about a very interesting thing, which was famous or like not famous, but mistranslations between French and English in philosophy that ended up being kind of absorbed into the kind of philosophical culture. Did you remember any of those?
Well, the one that's easiest to describe is the canals of Mars. So the idea is that an Italian, I suppose the word is astronomer, was describing in a scientific way, in the sense, describing is is really purposeful, what he saw on the surface of Mars. And he described something called canali, and it's quite a versatile word in Italian. It's everything from canals to furrows to channels to, it's shapes that are indented, that go on, that are sinuous, that curve. And the English astronomers reading his paper at the time thought they were canals and thought there was water potentially on Mars. And they've been called the canals of Mars in English until really recently. And we've had this idea that there were waterways on Mars for a really long time based on this man's description of the ground, the landscape. It's just not what he meant to say at all. That's just silly, really. But that kind of thing happens because things go unquestioned. Oh, something happened really recently. The kind of diplomatic standoff, you hope that never, I really don't know the context, so I'll have to research it, but you hope that interpreters are there and everyone's doing their job and everyone's also calm enough that if there's a mistake, it will be corrected in the next sentence. But there were demands being made from one government to another government, and the demands, I think, were being made on the English government. The English government thought that if it complied, that would be complying under a state of pressure, under duress, and so refused. And there was a massive standoff. And the point is that in French, to ask for something is demander. So it was just a request of the ordinary status of any kind of, these would be our preferred conditions.
Yeah.
It wasn't a demand. It wasn't, we will lay siege to you if you don't do X, Y, and Z. So there's some of the most basic mistranslations that just completely floored a whole negotiation.
Thanks so much to Sophie for coming on and for turning my sometimes nonsense questions into very interesting answers. I hope you enjoyed it. Definitely I would advise to go out and read Noémi Lefebvre's work. It's really amazing. Hopefully if Sophie translates Noémi's next book, then maybe she can come back on the podcast and talk about that as well. All right, thanks so much, guys. Thanks for listening.